So one of the most important questions about Sweden is Sweden expensive? And in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about that. A little bit spoiler alert, yes and no. But also I would say my opinion is very personal and it's based on my circumstances. And what are these circumstances? I just moved here almost 6 months ago. And I feel that's actually a reason why I have a certain opinion about Sweden. I will let you know at the end of the video if I think Sweden is expensive or not. So yeah, I just moved here almost 6 months ago, and before that I used to live in London, UK, almost 10 years. And if you haven't guessed already, I'm originally from Germany. I started to document my new adventure here in Sweden from the very beginning, so you get a good picture of what it is like for someone who is new in Sweden. And then hopefully we can compare this with my videos in the future when I live in Sweden maybe 1, 2, 3 or more years. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about how expensive Sweden really is. And I will pick out a few areas where I think people ask themselves, is that area really expensive? And then I try to, fill in my experience about it and what I heard from others, just to give you hopefully a broader picture about it. So let's start with housing. Housing is a big topic because everyone wants to live somewhere in Sweden. And I'm not talking about how difficult it is to maybe get an apartment here or a house. I want to talk more about the prices. And I would say it really depends. Yes, it depends. It depends where you live in Sweden. There are obviously the bigger cities like Stockholm. Then you can also choose to live in the countryside. So the prices obviously vary quite a bit if you live in a city or if you live in the countryside. Plus, for example, I live in Stockholm, and there it also depends where you live. There are more expensive areas, there's a city center if you want to live there. It's quite obvious that this might be more expensive, but you can also live a little bit outside of Stockholm, like me, for example. Although if I give you the example of how much I pay, which I actually mentioned in another video or two, and I also did a house tour if you want to check it out. But yeah, for example, we live in a big house, I would say. So the size of the house is quite big. And I think we need approximately 45 minutes, 1 hour to get into the center of Stockholm. And we pay about 28,000 krona, which is about 2,400 pounds or 3,200 US dollars. So I would say that's quite expensive. The size makes up for it, but especially if you're just one person moving to Sweden, this might not be for you. I also recently visited a friend of a friend, very central in London, and she had like a 1-studio apartment. So the kitchen, living room, bedroom was kind of all in one room, and then there was a separate bathroom. And she paid about 13,000 krona, which is about 1,100 pounds or 1,500 US dollars. So in my opinion, that's also quite expensive. I compare it a little bit with the places I lived in. And then obviously it also depends on how much you actually make, how much money you earn. So I gave you kind of like 2 expensive examples. I would say there's definitely cheaper things out there. You can obviously also live in a flat share. I have a family, so for me it doesn't apply anymore, but I have lived in flat shares all over, in London, in Munich, in Vienna, and even in Singapore. So I know what it is to share a flat, and it's definitely possible here as well, but I can't tell you much about it, how much it might be, because I have not experienced it. But yeah, if you have family or you want to live alone, it might be a bit more expensive, but then, like I said, it depends where you want to live, and it's definitely possible to find something cheaper. Another thing to consider is to buy a place, and that seems a little bit cheaper in terms of like paying your monthly mortgage. And then again, I have even seen like houses further out in the countryside, which are actually not that expensive. So there is definitely a possibility to get a property cheaper. If you have the possibility to live in the countryside, I think that's really good. That definitely makes it a little bit cheaper. But then again, just looking at my situation, I've only moved here. I now almost live here 6 months. For me, I don't really know the property market. I didn't know anything. So it wasn't really an option for me to buy a property straight away. So that's why I would say it could be a little bit more expensive, especially when you first move to Sweden. And then maybe later down the line, when you know a little bit more about the market, maybe you even want to buy a property or a house, then you can make sure to get a good price rather than an expensive price. So let's talk a little bit about food. Is food expensive in Sweden? And here again, there is no straight answer, unfortunately, because it all depends. In general, I would say, if you just move to Sweden and you go to the supermarket, to any supermarket, and you buy lots of stuff, it actually seems quite expensive. Let's be super honest, like when you're new and you don't know anything and you just go somewhere, it is quite expensive. You really have to understand and learn where you can go, where things are cheaper. You maybe want to take advantage of some offers, but all these things you have to get to know first. And when you first move to Sweden, it could be a little bit tricky. So I'm talking first about groceries in a supermarket. So it really depends what kind of supermarkets you go to. And also it seems that in the city, again, supermarkets are slightly more expensive than maybe in the countryside. And then there are supermarkets like Hemköp or ICA, which are a little bit more expensive. And then you have Lidl, which is actually a German supermarket, and they offer you cheaper ingredients. So I think it's almost everywhere that if you want certain things, you might want to go to different sources to get them, to make the most out of it, and maybe even have the cheapest options. Just to give you an example about our family, we are 2 adults and a 3-year-old. I would say we spend around 1,200 krona a week, which is about £100 or 140 US dollars. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but I think that's kind of the average. And that definitely went down a little bit at the beginning when we started going shopping here. We also didn't have a plan. We just went to the supermarket. We didn't have a list, and this also contributes sometimes for spending more money. So now we are a little bit more planned. I'm actually doing online shopping at the moment because I'm also pregnant, so it's much more convenient. It just comes here and I don't have to do anything, which is very convenient. And I think I could control my prices with online grocery shopping a little bit as well, which definitely helps. And then in terms of restaurants, I find it quite expensive, but again, I live basically in Stockholm. So in a big city, the biggest city in Sweden. So it is a bit more pricey. I compare it a lot with London, and I would say it's similar and maybe slightly more expensive. And maybe you have heard it already, alcohol is also a bit more expensive here. So when you actually buy alcohol in a restaurant, especially in the evening, it can really add up to your bill. Lucky me, I'm pregnant at the moment. I don't drink any alcohol, so I save a little bit of money here. But yeah, if you go actually at lunchtime, it's a bit cheaper. So that's definitely a recommendation. If you want to go out and explore the city and want to go to restaurants and stuff like that, then lunchtime is probably better than in the evening. Again, I have a daughter. So for us, most of the time when we go out, it's either lunchtime or kind of very early evening. So just to give you an example, I wrote it down here. For example, for lunch, you can easily spend 120 to 230 krona in general, which is 10 to 20 pounds or 14 to 27 US dollars. I think that's quite okay. Again, it's a city prices, so it might be cheaper in the countryside. And then if you go for dinner, it's also similar to London, I would really say. It depends what kind of restaurant you choose, obviously, but you can spend 700 to 1,200 krona, which is 60 to 100 pounds. I mean, you can spend more as well, to be honest, which is 80 to 135 US dollars. So again, it's really hard to say, like with restaurants and like eating out and then compare it to city life and countryside life, to say Sweden is expensive. In the city, certainly it's comparable with other European cities and it's not that cheap, but you can also certainly find your little gems or smaller restaurants or like street food, which is more affordable and it's really delicious. And then you can also go for traditional Swedish food, that kind of stuff. So there's a variety of food you can choose from and also locations. Let's talk about healthcare. I actually put out a little poll which I can show you so far the results here. And I basically ask if Sweden is expensive. And you can see that the results are between like, yes, it's expensive, or it depends. So what I'm talking about was a lot about it depends. But I feel also if you're just moving here, then I think it can be quite expensive, especially at the beginning, until you get the hang of it. But yeah, there were also comments about you have to see the bigger picture. You know, for example, healthcare and then kindergarten. These are all things where it barely costs anything. Yes, you pay a little bit of tax here, and it also depends if you're employed or self-employed. So if you're your own businesses pay taxes on top of employees. So if you're a business and your own employee, you obviously pay a little bit more taxes. But then I also have to say, I'm comparing it to other countries. And there are always advantages and disadvantages in different countries. But yeah, when it comes to healthcare, you know, in the UK, healthcare is for free. And also in Sweden, healthcare is pretty low cost. So that's definitely an advantage. But we have to also see that in other countries, it's also an advantage. And in Germany, for example, you do pay a little bit of tax with your paycheck as well to healthcare. But in general, it's also very affordable because you're kind of automatically insured. And kindergarten, which I just wanted to mention here as well, definitely very low cost, especially compared to the UK. But then again, if you compare it to Germany, it's very similar. So yes, you have advantages here, which are cheaper. But then we talked about food and housing, and it can get quite expensive. But yeah, just to finish, healthcare. I personally, for example, go to midwife appointments because I'm pregnant. I didn't have to pay anything and the care is really good. So I think that's definitely a plus. And if you want to ask yourself, is healthcare expensive or not? Then I would say it's not. There are options, you know, to go private, or if you don't work, you have to figure out how to do it. But if you are employed or self-employed, it kind of goes automatically from your taxes to healthcare and you are sorted. Then transportation. I want to talk about the prices of transportation, and I feel that is actually a really, really good deal here. So I don't think it's super expensive here, especially compared to London. You can buy a monthly ticket for 950 krona, which is about 85 pounds or 110 US dollars. And I think that's actually quite reasonable. I'm obviously talking about Stockholm area. So this is the kind of most expensive city. So I'm sure it's cheaper in other cities. And transportation, I'm very happy about it. It's very accessible. I mean, cheap would be maybe exaggerated, but it's absolutely affordable. And even like train tickets are not that bad. We recently went like an hour out of Stockholm and we paid around 560 krona, which is 48 pounds or 65 US dollars. For 2 adults and a child. And I would say it was not too bad. It wasn't the cheapest, but it was definitely not super expensive either. So I was quite happy with it. So transportation, I would say, is actually more on the cheaper side. Yes, and I mentioned childcare already. This is totally sorted here in Sweden, totally taken care of if you are a working parent or if you're studying. Then it's definitely very affordable. And that's also one of the many advantages to live here in Sweden. Of course, if you are not a parent, then you don't really take advantage of it. So it might not apply to you. But if you are, you pay around, I think, 1,200 to 1,700 krona per month. It depends, I think, how old your child is. I think the older your child is, the less you pay. And also it depends how many hours you have to work and how many hours it is in kindergarten. But yeah, it's about 100 to 150 pounds or 135 to 200 US dollars per month. And I've talked about it many times in my videos. It is definitely an advantage here. I haven't really talked about taxes because obviously Sweden is quite known for high taxes. But what I found here, it is to a certain degree true. Before we moved to Sweden, we also had an opportunity to move to Germany. And I looked into how many taxes we would have paid there with my partner starting a job there, kind of same position. And it actually turned out that he would have slightly paid more taxes in Germany than in Sweden. So I wouldn't say that's a crazy thing here. There's nothing to be scared of. If you come here and work here for a Swedish company or international company, doesn't matter, then I would say you have like around 30%, 35% you pay taxes, which is quite normal. What maybe people don't know is that the company pays taxes on top of that for you. So that's why it comes normally to about 45-50%. But yeah, if you're employed, it doesn't really matter and it's fine for you. I'm actually in a position now where I'm self-employed. I have a company. That means if I pay myself as an employee, I pay, my 35% individual taxes, and on top of that, as a business, I have to pay around 15%. So I am the one who actually pays 45 to 50%, but I'm also trying to figure out, what other advantages I have. I have expenses, which I maybe can write off and all that kind of jazz. I'm actually going to talk about starting a business here in Sweden very soon. So if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments down below. So I think I covered the most questions people have about, is Sweden expensive? If you have any further questions, please let me down in the comments below and I'm happy to answer them. But I think for now we are good and you can decide if Sweden is expensive. If you want to know if I think Sweden is expensive, I kind of would say yes, especially at the beginning. I mentioned it a little bit in this video. We live here for a few months. We are still renting. Yes, it was our choice to rent a little bit bigger, so we're paying actually a little bit more money. So I think maybe after a year or so, especially if we move, maybe if we buy a property, I think we can downsize a little bit on our costs. And maybe I will make another video in a year's time or so to let you know if I feel Sweden is still expensive. But yeah, if you just come here and you're new to Sweden, I think it's very natural that you think Sweden is a bit more expensive, especially if you live in a city, but it doesn't have to be expensive. So I'm excited to explore the less expensive side of Sweden soon. Thanks so much for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope I will see you in my next video. Until then, have a great day and stay safe. Hej då!